With all that said, let's jump into the sermon. Today we're starting a new series, and this is going to be our series leading up to Easter, and it's called All Things New. And so today we're going to be starting that by looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. So I'll give you a moment to turn there as I also get to the right spot. If you don't have a Bible or you can't find it, that's okay, because we'll have the words up on the screen next to me, so you can follow along there. Nobody will be left behind. Once again, we'll be in Mark chapter 2, and I'll read verses 13 through 17. Sounds like everybody's almost there. Okay. Well, if already, we'll jump into this. So, Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 13, it says, Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. Then, passing by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. While he was reclining at the table in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who were following him. When the scribes, who were Pharisees, saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he told them, "It is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners." So several years ago, I got the opportunity to go and preach at a chapel for a high school, a small private Christian high school. They have a chapel service with, all the students gathered and so on. And so I go to preach at this chapel service, and I was still a very young preacher at this time, very, very new, even younger and more new than I am now, right? And so I go, and they have a little time of worship before the preaching. They've got a student band up there leading worship with all these, half awake, apathetic teenagers being forced there, nobody's singing. And so it has all the awkwardness and everything that goes into a high school chapel service. And so I'm sitting on the front row getting ready to go up and share the gospel. And the chapel band finishes their set list, and they close in prayer, much like we would make a transition here. And the student that was leading worship, he's praying, and I don't remember everything he prayed, but I just do remember this one phrase. He said, "God, I just thank you that we're Christians and we're awesome." And that has just always stayed with me, because in my heart, my heart sunk in that moment. Oh goodness, the task I have before me now. But that's a really drastic example of the assumption that Christians and I think non-Christians have in our culture, and not that non-Christians in our culture think that Christians are awesome, but that they're supposed to be awesome, or that they're supposed to be really good. And often, as Christians and people who go to church, we have this assumption that being a Christian means you have to be awesome, or being a Christian means that you become a really good, nice person. We think that it's fundamentally something that's about self-improvement. Years ago, I actually referenced this a few weeks back. Years ago, C.S. Lewis wrote the book Mere Christianity, his classic book back in the 1940s. And in Mere Christianity, there's a chapter in the last section of the book called "Nice People Are New Men." And what he was taking on, the topic he was taking on in this section of the book was the topic of, is Christianity about self-improvement, or is it about something even bigger? Because he was specifically addressing the challenge of people who are not Christians but are very moral, very nice, very good, contrasted with people who are Christians and are nasty and awful and very unlikable, and asking the question, how can that be? And he said something along these lines. He said, "You see, if Christianity were just about making people better, then the good person that's not a Christian does not need the gospel. But if it is about something bigger, deeper, and even more fundamental, then it is something that every single person needs. Christianity is not a self-improvement plan. If you become a Christian, then yes, hopefully over time, you can and will grow, become a better person, become more like Christ. But fundamentally, Christianity is not a self-improvement plan. It is not a self-help philosophy. It is an invitation to be made new. What the gospel offers to us is not, here's how you can get better, but here's how you can become a new creation. This is what Paul tells us is the promise of the gospel in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, that all old things pass away whenever you enter into Christ. Your past, who you used to be, your deeds, your identity, everything goes, and it passes away, he says, the old. And he says, all things become new. And that is what we are looking at here in this series, how the gospel makes all things new. We're going to look at several different topics and look at how the gospel makes all things new in those topics. Today we're looking at how the gospel offers us a new relationship. And we're looking at it through this story. I want to look at it through a couple of themes or things that happen in this story. The first one is Jesus' call, Jesus' table, and then Jesus' mission. We're going to look at each one of those and what we have to learn from them. So his call, his table, and then his mission. And so his call. So what's happening here is this is early, so Mark chapter 2, this is early on in Mark. This is during Jesus' ministry in Galilee. The Gospels present this kind of division where Jesus spent a lot of time ministering in Galilee, and then he slowly makes his time down to Judah. We get the impression that he probably went back and forth a few times, but the Gospels kind of break up their sections into like Galilee and then Judah because it's working towards a climax of him arriving into Jerusalem. And so this is early on in Mark, whenever Jesus is doing his ministry in Galilee. And for most of the time that Jesus was in Galilee, his home base was a town called Capernaum. And Capernaum was largely based on, it was a maritime town because it was right there on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. So you had a lot of commerce happening around Capernaum. Because of the Sea of Galilee, you had a very heavy fishing industry going on there. It was a pretty major city, and that's where Jesus spent most of his time here in Galilee. And so before this story with Levi, the tax collector, and so on, Jesus is doing ministry in Galilee. Going around, he's doing a couple of healings and so on. But he comes to this place to where he's passing into the town, and he crosses this booth, as some translations say. This says the office. It would have been like a little booth, a little shack, similar to like the kind of booth that you'll see if you go into a parking garage and there's a parking attendant there. Or if you go into a toll road and there's a booth with a person there taking a toll for you to go on that road. This is a very similar idea. Levi, the son of Alphaeus, who was sitting in this booth, would have been sitting in a booth like that. And as people were passing on the highway going into Capernaum, he was taking a tax from them to go into the city. That was his job. He was a tax collector. Maybe you've heard of the Gospels talk about the tax collectors before, but they were people who were Jews, who were from the region. They were not sent from like the headquarters or from the corporate office in Rome. They were people who were from Galilee. Levi himself probably was from Capernaum. But what had happened was they had joined the Roman government, an act which in their eyes, in the Jewish people's eyes, was an act of treason and an act of betrayal because they joined the Roman government, the government that was oppressing them, that had turned them into a colony of their own, and began working for the Roman government, taking taxes to feed the system, right? That is what Levi is doing here. So Jesus and his disciples are passing into the city, and here's Levi. Now, in the eyes of all the people of Capernaum in Galilee, and maybe Jesus' own disciples, disgust. Whenever you pass by that booth, it is not enjoyable, right? Like no one is ever very happy to see the toll booth collector. Whenever you go into a toll highway or you go into a parking garage, you're not thrilled to see them. You're not very interested in them often. You're wanting to just pay your tax or pay your toll that you have to do and then get on with your day. It was like that for them, but then there was that added element of here's somebody who should be one of us, but he's working for them. So while his disciples and everyone else on a daily basis would pass Levi by in his booth in disgust, ignoring him as much as they could, maybe even harassing him quite a bit because of who he was, Jesus passes by and he stops and he sees him. So just consider this. Place yourself in Levi's shoes. So we can understand what it would be like to be the people on the outside, but place yourself in Levi's shoes, who day in and day out, his job was to sit in that booth all alone. He sat in that booth all alone, and people passed by with him knowing that they cannot stand his guts. That booth for him is not just a place of loneliness because it's a small space that only he can occupy. That booth for him is a symbolic place of loneliness too. It's almost the visible symbol of his separation from society and his society's hatred for him. Here's Levi who, that was his daily experience, being misunderstood or detested or disgusted and all alone, no one being interested in him. But on this day, Jesus is passing by, and it says Jesus turns and he sees him. He had always been invisible before. But Jesus sees him, and here's the thing. Whenever everyone else just wanted to get on with their day as fast as possible, Jesus wanted a relationship with him. Because it says that Jesus sees him, and he says to him, "Follow me." Jesus sees it, this tax collector, who everyone else hated, and he wanted a disciple. Jesus wanted this tax collector to be his disciple. Why? What does it mean for him to say, "Follow me"? It is a call into discipleship, which is like being a student to someone who is mentoring you. And so it's a call to discipleship, but it's not a call to be a student in the sense of like most of your college classes where you sat in a room with a large group and you just heard a lecture. It was a relational learning experience. Look at Jesus with the 12. He spent all of his time with them. They ate their meals together. They stayed at the same places together. They prayed together. They served together. It was a deeply intimate relationship. And he's inviting this tax collector, this betrayer, this treasonous man, this disgusting man, this lonely man who had no friends because of his choices. Jesus says to him, "I want you to be my friend. I want you to be in relationship with me. Out of all the people who are surrounding me, wanting my attention, I see you, and I want you to be my disciple." Why in the world would Jesus want that? The answer is love. Because when everyone else looked at Levi and saw a sinful, disgusting man and wanted nothing to do with him, Jesus saw Levi, a sinful man, and loved him and invited him into a new relationship with him. And in that relationship, healing Levi's lonely soul. Levi immediately jumps out of his booth in response to Jesus, because for the first time, him being loved and wanted by somebody was such a powerful invitation that he couldn't hold himself back. There was no moment of deliberating over it. He jumps into it, because what Jesus has done and what he started to do here is to touch Levi's soul and to heal it from that sick loneliness that he had deep down in our soul. And that's something that happens to all of us. Sin is something, even if you're not a treasonous tax collector, sin is something that makes all of us lonely in one way or another. Let me walk through this for just a moment. It's something that will make us all lonely in one way or another. It might make us literally lonely in terms of our person-to-person relationships, because sin is something that is fundamentally antisocial. Sin is antisocial. Let me explain this. How does a solar system work? I'm not an astronomer, but I remember this from third grade science. A solar system works because there's a core, right? There's a center of that solar system, and it has a gravity that keeps everything in that solar system revolving around that center. And as long as everything in that solar system is revolving around that center, there's harmony, things go well. But what happens in a solar system if you have the center, and then one of the other planets decide that they want to be the center of the solar system now, and that everything should revolve around them? And then another planet decides the same, and another one. And so now you have all these wannabe centers of the solar system fighting for it to revolve around them. What's going to happen? Collision, chaos, conflict. And the same thing happens in human relationships. Whenever we can all agree on and unify around one center, maybe you experience this sometimes in work, or if you ever play a sport and you're on a team sport and everybody's revolving around the center of, we want to win this game, right? Or we want to win the championship. And so as long as everybody's revolving around that center, there's harmony and things are going well. But what if one guy or girl decides that they want to be the superstar? And no longer is about the team winning the championship, but them standing out. What happens? There's conflict. There's chaos. The solar system begins to crash. The same thing happens in our own lives. Why do you have conflict in your marriage? Let's be honest. 99% of the time, it's because you're trying to be the center of the solar system. You're trying to be the center of reality. You're trying to make your spouse or your family or your kids revolve around you and your wishes and your whims. Right? The same thing is probably true with your friends or your roommates. So often what happens, why is there conflict? Is because you're trying to be the center of your solar system. Another way that we could put it is following a king. If we all have the same king, we're following after that king, then there'll be harmony because we're pursuing the same goal. But what happens when there's a rebel? And you see, each and every one of us are rebels. Rebels based off of different motivations. Maybe you want people to, maybe you want to build a kingdom. You're a rebel wanting to build a kingdom where people honor you because of your, because you appear to be very successful and smart and attractive to people and whatever else. Or maybe the kingdom that you're trying to build is the picture perfect family. Or the kingdom that you're trying to build is one of building up material goods and whatever else. But whenever you try to start to build your own kingdom, what that does is it makes you start to view the people around you as your subjects. But they're not your subjects. So whenever reality bumps up against your rebellious dreams, there's conflict. You see what I mean? By sin being essentially antisocial. And so we can see that extremely vividly whenever Levi is sitting alone in his tax booth. But how many of us are living our lives with spiritual tax booths? We're being isolated from the people around us, maybe because of deceit. There are things that we're holding back, that we're being dishonest about. Or maybe because of us trying to be the center of a solar system, or us trying to turn our homes into little mini kingdoms where our families or our friends or our communities or our workplace colleagues are serving and revolving around us. Sin is antisocial. But here's the thing. You can also have a lonely soul with a lot of friends. Because some of you guys, and some of us are more challenged, more socially challenged, and some of us are more socially gifted. And so some of you, or some of us, can make a lot of friends, have a lot of connections, be a great networker, or have a good circle of friends, and all the while still have a very lonely soul. Because sin will still separate us, though it may not be so drastically separating you from the person-to-person relationships around you. It will separate you from the relationship that cannot be replaced by any person, which is their relationship with God. You can have all the friends. You can have all the social media followers. You can have all the honor from your workplace colleagues. But if you are still living as a rebel to the ultimate king, then there's separation between you and him. There's separation between you and God. And so, even having a lot of friends doesn't mean that your soul is not still lonely and sick. Your soul is not still residing in a spiritual tax booth. Because we were made for a relationship that no human can satisfy. What Levi needed, he needed community. We were made for community. We need that. But he needed a relationship with God too. And so Jesus, God, comes to him and says to him, I want that relationship with you. He sees him and he wants that relationship with him. Because Jesus loves sinners and he calls them to follow him. What does it mean to follow Jesus? To follow Jesus means that we are offered in relationship with him a new life. Following Jesus means to be in obedient relationship with him. It means entering into a new relationship with Jesus where that new relationship is not just one relationship added to all the others that you have, but it is a new relationship that transforms all others. It is a relationship that now takes priority. Everything else in your life shifts in priority now. There's a reshuffling of the deck. There's a reordering of the hierarchy of importance in terms of importance of relationships and importance of time management, importance of budgeting resources. Whenever you enter into this relationship with Jesus, it changes all of those. So it's not the same thing as just making a new network contact in your career. Whenever you meet somebody at a conference, do they revolutionize your life? Probably not. Does meeting that person at the coffee shop, a random encounter with a person at a coffee shop, do you change the way that you manage your schedule because of them? Or do you look at your spouse and children differently now because of them? I certainly hope not. Coming into a new relationship with Jesus is not like that. It's not just adding one among all the others that you have. It is now the relationship, the fundamental one, the core one, the one that brings a whole new life. And in that new life, everything else changes. It reorders, it shuffles. And what happens is there will be healing in your soul and healing even in your person-to-person relationships, because now in Jesus, you're no longer trying to act like you're the center of the universe. Whenever you come into a relationship with Jesus and you hear the God of the universe say to you, I see you just as you are, with all your nastiness, with all your sinfulness, with all your treasonous, rebellious thoughts, and yet I still want you. That is a word, and that is an experience which is so satisfying for your soul, or can be so satisfying for your soul if you have not experienced that yet, that it now frees you from the need to prove to yourself or everyone else that you can be a king and you can build your kingdom. And so now you're freed from living like you did before. You're freed from trying to force your spouse or your nearest friends or the people in your office from trying to revolve around you. You don't need them to revolve around you, because now you're revolving around the true center, which is Jesus Christ. And that relationship with him is so freeing and so satisfying, and you're getting all that you need out of revolving around him, that it makes you someone who becomes more outward focused now and willing to serve rather than have others serve you. You see, now, whenever you're slighted, or whenever somebody says something that just gets under your skin, whereas before, if you saw it as a threat to your reputation or your image, because, well, I've got a kingdom to build, right? You had to lash out in response. Or you had to be impatient whenever your children wouldn't listen to you because you've got a kingdom to build, right? People aren't revolving around me. So you lashed out in anger or in impatience or in judgmental thoughts and attitudes, whatever it is now. But if Jesus Christ has given you this new life where you're no longer needing to build your kingdom, no longer having people revolve around you, you're free when slighted to be able to forgive. Not let it affect you. You're free whenever people are being demanding of you serving them, to not have to avoid them, to not have to pull away, to not have to make excuses, but to actually be able to serve, to be sacrificial, to be generous. You don't need to be stingy with your resources anymore, because all of your resources aren't being directed into building your kingdom no longer. All of your resources now are about building Jesus' kingdom. So you can use them to give. You can use them to serve. Following Jesus means entering into a whole new life, where he changes, he revolutionizes, he heals you. He heals you through relationship with him, and then he might also start healing your relationship with other people as well. And we see Jesus initiating and going into this relationship with Levi through table fellowship. Because that's what happens here is he calls Levi. Levi leaves his tax booth. He leaves behind that old life, right? Like Paul said, all things pass away. I love it. He leaves the tax booth, and Jesus and his disciples go to Levi's home, and it says that they share a table with Levi, and there were many other tax collectors and sinners now. You know, like Levi knew the underbelly of Capernaum, and he was able to invite all the wrong people, so that it got the Pharisees very upset that Jesus was sitting down and eating with all the wrong people, with all the nasty people, with all the sinners. So this is how Jesus enters into this relationship with Levi. Let me give you 3 points on just that quick little story about the table fellowship. 3 quick points on how entering into this relationship with Jesus transforms. Here's the first one. Jesus transformed Levi's table into a gathering place for his new community. Because here's what Jesus is doing. We see this very often throughout the Gospels. Because if you've read the Gospels before, you know this isn't the only time that Pharisees have grumbled because Jesus is hanging out with the wrong people. It happens quite often. Jesus is eating meals, and he's hanging out with, and he's talking with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes and all these different people, and they don't like it. And they don't like it because what Jesus is doing is he is forming a new community out of all these misfits, out of all these people that didn't belong before. He's forming a new community that the Pharisees had excluded them from. They said those people are not good enough, they're wrong, they're bad, and so they don't deserve to be in God's community. But Jesus comes and he starts forming a new community with them because he says, no, I want relationship with them. And so that's what Jesus is doing here. He takes Levi's table, a table which was once just for Levi, or maybe it was for Levi and whatever friends from the underbelly of Capernaum he had to come together in their misery and their wretchedness and their sinfulness. And what Jesus does is he takes Levi's table and he transforms it into his table for gathering sinners. What does this all mean? It means that Jesus changes the environment. Like I said, this was not just one new relationship for Levi. It changed everything. It changed his home. It changed his table. Whenever Jesus enters a place, everything is different. Jesus fundamentally changes the nature of Levi's home whenever he comes into a relationship with Levi by making Levi's table his place now for gathering and creating his new community. How amazing. Once again, this reminds us, you don't just add Jesus to your life. Becoming a Christian doesn't mean, oh, now I add a new weekly worship service to my schedule or adding one more thing. He changes everything. Whenever you come into a relationship with Jesus, he becomes Lord. He redefines the environment. He changes everything. So that's the first thing that we see Jesus doing. He changes the nature of Levi's home and his table. The second thing that he does, and that we can note, is that Jesus' table is one of grace. So like I said, the Pharisees were grumbling in response to Jesus gathering this community together. They didn't like it. Here's why they didn't like it. Because they thought that they should be sitting there. That's why they're grumbling. Because Jesus at this point, though it's still very early in his ministry, he's gaining a lot of popularity. He's going around and he's teaching. He's performing all these miracles. At this point, the Pharisees, the religious establishment, are still fairly warm to and fairly open to Jesus. And so here's this new renowned teacher and miracle worker. Here is a prophet in Israel, like one they have not seen for centuries. And instead of being in table fellowship with them, the professionals, the Bible teachers, the pastors and the preachers, he's having table fellowship, relationship with them. They're grumbling because they thought to get to sit at our table, you got to earn it. You've got to prove that you've got the goods. You've got to prove that you are good enough, or you've got to prove that you have repented hard enough, or that you have followed the law well enough. But what Jesus is doing instead is he says, no, my table is not one that's based on merit. My table is one that's based on grace. Because here is a bunch of people who do not deserve to be sitting at Jesus' table. Here are a bunch of people who do not deserve at all to be in relationship with him. But that's who his table is for. It's about merit versus grace. It's about a relationship of merit versus grace. Very often we think to ourselves, can I have a seat? Maybe you don't say it that way, but can I actually have a relationship with Jesus? Can I actually know him? Can I actually grow in a relationship with him? Can he actually persevere in loving me whenever I fail and sin and still have so much work to do on myself? And very often, maybe you're not a Christian yet, and one of the things that is holding you back is a deep doubt in your heart of wondering, can I actually sit at his table? Because deep somewhere in your heart, you are being tempted with the thought, no, you got to prove it before you can sit at his table. You've got to go to church for a certain amount of time. Or you've got to quit doing this, or quit doing that. You have to prove your morality, and you have to clean yourself up in order for Jesus to let you sit at his table. Maybe you've been held back from him, and you need a relationship with him, but you've been held back because of that doubt. Maybe you're a Christian, you've been walking with him for a while, and you keep sitting on the edge of the seat. Because every time you sin or give into temptation, you think, well, now I have to leave. I lost my seat. I don't deserve it anymore. And so you've always got this 1 foot in, 1 foot out mentality. Because deep within your mind or your heart somewhere, you are still living based upon the lie that sitting at Jesus' table is based on your work and your merit and your ability to earn it. The Pharisees grumbled because that's what they thought, but Jesus was changing the rules. Jesus was showing that his table was a table based on grace, where your seat at his table is there for you, not waiting for you to prove that you can have it, but is there waiting for you because it is a gift from him. Here's the third thing. When you're in relationship with him, he turns your life into a gathering place for sinners. Levi has just entered into this new relationship with Jesus, and Jesus is already using him to be a missionary for what he is doing. Already. It immediately happens. You see, Jesus does not call Levi to come into a relationship with him and receive all the benefits that will come from it, the healing, the grace, the forgiveness of sins, and so on and so forth, and then to just enjoy all of those on his own. Jesus intends for Levi to come into a relationship with him and then to become someone who gathers more, to then become someone who goes out and tells, to then become someone who once used his table as the center of his kingdom and now using his table as a place where it is a gathering for more sinners. If you are in relationship with Jesus, if you're a Christian, you've been walking with him, has he made you somebody who becomes a gatherer? Made your home a gathering place for more sinners to come? Or have you been receiving his benefits, receiving his goodness, learning from him, and just keeping it all, holding it all in, not sharing, not showing, not letting others know and receive that relationship as well? There's no gap in time. Levi doesn't leave his tax booth and then Jesus say to him, now you have to go to seminary, Levi, then you can share. He doesn't say, now you need to go to the next steps class, Levi, then you can share. Or now you need to do this or that. Immediately, he becomes a gatherer. Are you a gatherer as well? What does all this show us? It shows us that this new relationship that we come into with Jesus is one that brings new life, and with that new life comes complete and utter transformation. Everything changes. Levi changes. He was once alone in his tax booth. Now he's gathering a whole community right along with Jesus. His home changes. The whole environment of his home changes. The nature of what the religious system had assumed before changes. Coming into relationship with Jesus is a transforming relationship. And so, if you know Jesus, the question is he changing you? If you claim to be walking with him, is there growth? Is there transformation? Has there been a defeat of sin and growth in looking more like Jesus? Or has there been a lack of growth? If there's a lack of growth and a lack of transformation, you might need to ask yourself, do I know him? Am I sitting at his table that changes everything? Maybe some of us need to ask that. But maybe some of us, we are sitting at that table, but our transformation is just coming slowly. And hey, that's true for me. The transformation might be slow. So you can't compare yourself to yesterday. And you can't compare yourself to who you were last week. Honestly, you might not be able to compare yourself to who you were last year. But you have to look at your life and the time that you have been sitting at Jesus' table, or the time that you think you've been sitting at Jesus' table, and ask, has he been changing me? Not just behavior modification, but deep heart transformation. And friends, don't doubt if your transformation is slow. Slow transformation is still good. Don't allow yourself to doubt, and don't allow yourself to be filled with insecurity or guilt just because it's slow. Here's one of the things that C.S. Lewis said in that chapter of Mere Christianity. He said, like I said before, that Christ intends to transform us into new creatures. He says, it's not just like trying to train a horse to jump better, but to change a horse into a winged creature that can fly, a completely new creature, a complete new creation. And he added this afterwards. He said, now at first, the new creation that the horse has been transformed into, it might not be fully big, fully functioning wings. It might just be little nubs at first on the shoulders. But they grow over time. At first, he might not look like a glorious Pegasus. He might be pretty awkward. Maybe you're very awkward in your Christian growth right now. There's some great days of victory, and there are some low moments of defeat. And there's times when you feel on fire, as we say, and times where you feel absolutely dry. Times where you're growing, or times where you feel like you just don't even know what you're doing at all. Just because Christ has transformed you into a new creation doesn't mean that it might not be a slow transformation process. But why does he transform? Because he is on a mission to do so. It was his whole reason to leave heaven, take on the form of a man, and come to this earth. Look at what he said in verse 17 in response to the Pharisees grumbling. He says, "It is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick." He says, "I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners." Notice the implicit statement in there. He is essentially saying, I came on a mission. I came for a reason. I didn't come here. I didn't just fall here on accident. I didn't stumble on the golden brick roads of heaven or whatever there is there, right? And fall off a cloud and end up here. He said, I came for a reason. Jesus is on a mission. He says, I came to. And what was Jesus' mission? He says, I came to call the sinners. I came to bring healing. That's what he says. He says that he is the one who is going to be the doctor bringing wholeness, healing, and new life to those who are sick, just like Levi was. Jesus' mission was to bring healing to those who are sick and call sinners into relationship with himself. And that's what we see happening here in the context of this story. Because you know what's happening right before this? At the end of chapter 1 of Mark, Jesus heals a leper. Someone with leprosy in the eyes of this context during the time, during this day. Someone with leprosy, it was the most despicable disease. It was the worst of all diseases. It was the one that was seen as the most disgusting. But Jesus heals a man with the most despicable disease, and then he heals a man guilty of the most despicable sin in their eyes. Then he goes and he heals the paralytic, and then he comes and here's a man that we see no outward issue of sickness or disease, but Jesus came to heal him too, nonetheless. There may not be disease in your body, but there's still good news for you. There's still good news of what the good doctor can do for your sick and lonely soul. It's the mission that he came on, to offer us a healing relationship. How many of us need healing in our souls? And we need healing in our hearts, healing from the guilt, healing from the anxieties, healing from the stress of trying to be the center of our own universes or of building our own kingdoms. How many of us need healing from the loneliness? How many of us need healing from the insecurities and doubts that hold us back from experiencing the fullness of God's grace and blessing on our lives, or the things that are holding us back from experiencing the full blessings of Christian community? And it's what Jesus offers us, is a healing relationship. But how? The clue is in something that's implied here in the beginning of this story. I've studied this story several times now, but it was only this past week in studying that this jumped out to me. Well, through some research. I didn't discover it on my own, but that I saw this, and it blew my mind. So Jesus is already in Capernaum, and then for some reason, in verse 13, he's going back into Capernaum. It says he was out again beside the sea. So that means he's outside of the town, he's at the sea, and then he's going back in. Mark never says anything explicitly about Jesus leaving the town. He just implicitly telling us, at some point, Jesus, after doing several healings and a lot of ministry, had gone out to the sea, and now he is coming back into the town. And that makes complete sense, because why else would he be passing Levi? Levi was sitting at the entrance to the city. He's going back in. And here is what it shows us. Implicitly what's happening here is Jesus had gone out to the sea in a time of retreat. We see this happening all throughout the Gospels. There's a rhythm to Jesus' life. He heavily engages in ministry, in teaching, in healings, in debates, and then he withdraws. And he always withdraws into either the wilderness or to the sea. He withdraws for a time to go and be with the Father, and then he comes out of that time of withdrawal, of retreat. You can think of the 40 days he spent in fasting in the wilderness. He comes out in the power of the Spirit and enters into powerful ministry once again. And so implicitly what's happening here, Jesus has withdrawn again, and he goes back. But Jesus' retreat is not a beachside vacation. That's not what is happening. Or whenever he goes into the wilderness, it's not like the kind of hiking that the peaceful, rejuvenating hiking that you like to do. The wilderness was a hostile place. And especially in the minds of Jewish thinkers and Mediterranean thinkers, the sea was a hostile place. It was not a good place. But these are the places that Jesus withdrew to. Jesus withdraws to the sea, which in their minds was symbolizing all of the hostile forces against God. But Jesus goes, engages into it, and then he comes out, and what is the result? What is the result of Jesus diving into the hostility of the world towards God? Levi getting to enter into a new relationship, new life, and becoming a disciple. Levi's new life, Levi's table of grace, Levi's healing, all came because Jesus faced the fundamental problem of the world. Because Jesus had withdrawn, engaged into the hostilities against God, and out of that, and then out of his victory over them, being able to bring gifts of healing and grace to Levi and all the other tax collectors and sinners at his table. What does this mean for us? It means this. It means that we are also offered new life. We are offered a healing relationship. We are offered grace in Jesus Christ because Jesus faced the hostility of the world against God on our behalf. He ultimately faced it not in a withdrawal to the wilderness or to the sea, but in the cross. When Jesus went to the cross and he took upon himself God's wrath for our sin. Whenever Jesus Christ on the cross became the rebel that you and I are. And he died the rebel's death that you and I deserved. But through him experiencing that, through him dealing with that problem on our behalf, he is now, because of him dealing with that problem, overcoming it in his resurrection, able to bring us new life, able to bring us healing. You see, our relationship with Jesus and our ability to have a seat at his table based upon grace is because of him giving up the seat that he deserved. Because of him taking on the condemnation that we deserved, we get this new relationship with God. This new relationship with God that changes everything. And Jesus is calling you today to follow him in a new and transforming and healing relationship. One which will utterly revolutionize every single part of your life. Remember, he is not calling you to just self-improvement. He is not saying, I'm giving you an opportunity to make yourself better, but he is offering to make you a completely different person. Like Lewis said, God became man to turn creatures into sons, not simply to produce better men of the old kind, but to produce a new kind of man. Let's pray. Father, we come before you and we pray that you would help us to have a vision of your love, that you would help our hearts and our souls to see and to know that you have seen us in our isolation, that you have seen us in the booths of sin that we sit in, separated from others and separated from you. But Lord, you see us in our nastiness and in our sinfulness and in our treasonous hearts. You see all of these things, and yet you want us because your love is so great. Father, would you pull our hearts towards you? Would you pursue us in that relentless love this morning so that we would step out of the booths, so that we would step out of our former life, so that we would step out of trying to be the center of the universe, the kings and queens of our own kingdoms, and that we would enter into this new relationship with you that is offered to us by grace and experience the healing that our hearts so desperately need. To get to walk through and know and live a life of sitting at your table, where sitting at your table changes us and transforms us. And every new stage of transformation is a new stage of healing. Every new season of growth is a new season of being closer to you. Lord, through the power of the gospel and based purely upon the merit of Jesus Christ, we ask for these things for all of us here today. If there are any, Father, who need to enter into a relationship with you for the first time, would you convict their hearts and draw them into saying yes to that relationship? And for the weak and weary Christian, would you remind them that their seat is guaranteed, not based on their performance, but based on the finished work of Jesus Christ? And let us all worship you today, Lord, in a little special moment and glimpse of that new life. We pray these things in Jesus' name.